What's up, guys? Welcome back to Read and React. My name is Logan Campbell, and today we're going to be going over the 5 riskiest running backs in the early rounds of your draft. Now, I know I said that I was going to do bad running back values, but honestly, as I was looking at the ADP and at the board, it was hard to find bad values that weren't just players that I didn't really like, nor would have any chance at drafting this year. There are plenty of guys that I am avoiding this year, but none of them are because it's a bad value. Value is basically saying, oh, there is a place where I will draft this guy, and a good value is where you would draft them ahead of where they're at, bad value behind where they're at. But with fantasy football, there are just so many guys that I straight up don't like that it's not so much of a value issue as much as it is a player evaluation issue. So for that reason, we're going to go through risk, which is one of the most important things to understand before your draft, especially what players carry the most risk and how to mitigate that. Now, risk is natural for every player. If you are going after a player that has no risk, well, then you're going to be drafting nobody. Maybe you get some kickers, because those might be the one position that carries no risk. But every player, whether you like it or not, has risk. Whether it's the 101 or the last pick, they all have it. Risk, though, is not inherently a bad thing. Risk is what opens up the value in your draft. It's just important to find the balance between the guys who are being pushed down the board because of their possible risk and the guys who are more stagnant because of their low risk. Now, like I said, it's important to have balance. If you take no risks, you end up with a flat, boring, low upside team that is not fun to watch, first off, which to me is one of the most important parts of fantasy football. You should enjoy watching your team, but the other thing is you're going to miss out on the upside and therefore probably not be a very competitive team. Just because you may have the guys who performed exactly where they were drafted this year doesn't mean that you are going to be competitive, because realistically, if we're playing the stats here, half the teams are going to have overperformed, half are going to have underperformed, and that puts you smack dab in the middle, which is not where you want to be. You want to be winning. That is the goal. There are no points for third, there are no points for fourth unless you're playing in a league that pays out every position, in which case, please invite me because I'd like some free money. But the other flip side of that coin is taking too many risks can cause you to be playing from behind so early in the season that it's virtually impossible to catch up. I know I just said there's no points for second or third or whatever, but the truth is you still have to give yourself the highest possible range of outcomes. And if you draft all the riskiest players, you're essentially flipping a coin and saying, I'm either going to finish last or I'm going to maybe make the playoffs. Because once you make it to the playoffs, the winner is not guaranteed whatsoever. And so obviously the natural thing to do is end up somewhere in the middle. That is probably the most Captain Obvious piece of advice I could give you, but it's true. Hedging your bets and just really trying to take some risk but also not take on all the risk is a key part of your draft, and really diversifying that across positions. You shouldn't be drafting 3 risky running backs, even if you got 3 safe receivers. Ideally, you want to be looking for 1, maybe 2 if they're like semi-risky guys at each position, and really play the combination of floor and risk. If you draft a Christian McCaffrey, who is a high likelihood of injury, but also a high likelihood of a top 2 finisher, who we'll actually get to later, you better be prepared for the downside case and hedge your bets properly. Taking on risk without a backup plan is a recipe for disaster, and it's going to cause you to scramble the entire year if one of those risks comes to fruition. Now, what type of risk do we specifically have at running back? Now, for most positions, there is pretty similar risk, like injuries. Every player has the risk of injury, but the niche ways that it manifests is slightly different. So with running backs, high injury risk really is twofold. One, it's players who've had a extensive injury history or an aggressive injury, such as an ACL or Achilles. This is guys who got hurt late last year, who we typically don't like to draft simply because it takes them about half the year to ramp up and return to form. Now, again, if you can buy down that risk and get a guy significantly later, he can come on and be a second half winner for you, but you have to plan that accordingly. The other thing that we take into account with injuries is players who are projecting to have an injury this year. And I always say projecting injuries is like trying to predict which way the rain will fall. But to a certain degree, there are metrics that prove it, especially with running back, the main one being volume. This is why we have seen guys like Saquon and CMC and Jonathan Taylor all have injuries following these big years, and it's why CMC is such a risk year after year, because he's coming off this year, I believe, 370 touches. Well, okay, that's great, but he's also old. He's been injured. There is tons of risk there, and we just typically see that volume really start to take a toll. The one guy who is invincible to this is Derrick Henry, and I don't even try to question it anymore. The dude just is what he is. He is probably the biggest outlier in fantasy football, not because of his production, but just because of how much punishment his body can take and how every year we're waiting for the injury, and it's honestly just never comes. So after injury, another risk that I think goes undetected is loss of role or volume. This is primarily when a team brings in a running back with some high draft capital or a free agent with a decent salary, and it just really can eat into the workload of the former lead back. And this can also be a delayed effect. We see this a lot of the time with rookie running backs, where the first year, maybe 2 years, they aren't performing as much, but then all of a sudden they burst onto the scene and take over the job. So this is always something to be aware of. If you are targeting a running back who has a highly drafted or highly touted second guy, then you really want to make sure that you are getting them at a good cost and that you are prepared for the scenario where they may lose some work. They may not lose the job altogether, but it is possible to lose some work. Look at Blake Corum with Kyron Williams. Blake Corum, it took him a couple years to get going, but then last year it turned into more of a split backfield. Now, Kyron still produced, but it's just a risk to be aware of because not everybody can. Going deeper into that, the overprojection of role and volume is one of the most common unseen risks as well. This is typically seen with rookies or running backs who switch situations where they're the new hot commodity. They're the flashy gold coin that everybody wants, and they get jacked up the draft board because if they start, they will light it on fire. Look at Trayvon Henderson last year. I fell for it last year. I love Trayvon Henderson. I hated Ramondre Stevenson. The stars were aligned for Trayvo to be an absolute stud. And he had some good weeks, but it took Ramondre getting hurt. And this year, it looks to be more of the same. So it's just really important to do your research and to, again, be prepared for the possibility that what you see isn't what you're going to get, because only the coaches know what they're going to do. We don't. And so it's really important in these situations where a new running back is brought in to make sure that you are targeting the right guy and that you are not over projecting one way or the other. The last one, and this one is hardly a risk, this one is kind of just a predictive metric, is poor offensive performance. If an offense performs worse, naturally a player is going to perform worse in fantasy. It's simple math. Running backs benefit the most from touchdowns due to the goal line, and if a team is scoring less touchdowns, the running back is kind of the first guy to feel the brunt of that. Now, it can be overcame, but it requires very specific circumstances where you need really good volume, efficiency, or receiving upside. And typically, it's hard for a guy to, on a poor offense, to be a top 3 to 5 back. Now, you can get RB1 finishes out of them, but again, it requires an uphill battle, and you're still pretty much always going to have some really rough weeks, because if you're looking at some of these bottom 6 to 8 offenses, there are weeks when they have 150 total yards and 2 field goals, and your running back just got you 4 points. So again, it's just being aware of that. It's drafting with that in mind, and just really when you look at a player, seeing their range of outcomes and thinking, how can I account for both the good and the bad? Because the good's going to win you your league. That's what you're hoping for. But accounting for the bad is the way that championships are won, because not everyone is going to think that way. Now, risk alone, like I said, does not make a player one to avoid. Running backs can outperform with these risk factors and turn into league winners. And again, it's how you find value. A guy who's being pushed on the board due to injury, who doesn't get hurt and performs great, ends up being a league winner and an outperforming guy. But the key with risks is, I think, determining an avoid, a target, or a neutral on the guy. Is it a guy that you are going after because you think the industry is wrong? Is it someone that you're avoiding altogether because you just don't see a good case and it's just not worth the risk? Or are you just kind of neutral? Neutral is typically where most of us land. Again, that's the middle road result. But it's important to kind of see how you feel about each of those players and just what risks you are willing to take in the draft. So in this, we're going to go over some of the riskiest running backs who will define fantasy football for better or worse. Some of these will be league winners. Some of them are going to cost you your season, but I'm not here to make the decision for you. Merely pass along the information and my opinions and hopefully help you come to your own conclusions, because in the end, that's all that me or anyone else should be doing. We should be helping you make your own decisions. I'm not going to tell you who to draft, but I'll provide you information for you to figure out who you want to draft and who you feel comfortable drafting. Quick disclaimer, these are all top 50 players in terms of overall ADP. This was done intentionally because I think that when you're looking at risky players, you really want to evaluate the guys who are starting on your team first. If I get a fourth running back and they have the risk of an overprojection of their role or an injury, that's not something I'm that worried about. What we really want to look at is the starting guys you're drafting, because these are the guys who could cost you your leagues if you lose your RB1 or your RB2 or your flex. Any of those guys, if you lose them or they underperform in any way due to these risk factors, you need to be prepared. So with that, let's get right into it. All right, so I've got 5 guys here. 3 are guys who are on poor offenses, 1 injury risk, and 1 who just kind of fits a bunch of different bills and has a lot of minor risks that stack up to 1. So the first guy we're going to get into, and a guy who is just stuck on a bad offense, is Quinshon Judkins. Now, Judkins is a very good runner. He is a very talented running back as a player, but he's just on a horrible offense with very few scoring opportunities. He needs the high volume to produce. He has an okay receiving ceiling, but not enough that you can confidently feel like he is going to return you on your investment and really help you in your league. He goes off at RB21, 46.6 overall, so about 5th rounder. You can probably get him after you've gotten both receivers in a flex and an RB1. So he's not horrible. I don't really think he should be going much lower, but I think it's just really hard to see the upside case of him finishing any higher than RB16, maybe fringe RB12 if their offense ends up being significantly better than we think. But overall, RB21 just feels more likely, and if anything, it feels like he's going to be worse, again, just because of the Browns' offense. Now, Dylan Sampson is kind of the better receiver as well. So the Browns project to be behind in a lot of games. The defense got worse, so they're going to be playing from behind. They're going to have to pass the ball, and Dylan Sampson is the primary receiver. Now, Judkins can still get some of that work, but I just don't know that the volume is going to be there enough to help you win consistently in your league. And honestly, there's just guys that I would rather have. I'd rather wait around for some floor consistency at RB2 with a guy like DeAndre Swift or David Montgomery, where you kind of have seen them do it year over year. You know what you're going to get. And again, they may not have that high of upside, but neither does Quinshon Judkins. So why take a guy around earlier if you just need a kind of 12 point per game running back 2 who can maybe get you a touchdown every other week? The guys on the good offenses like Swift and David Montgomery are more likely to get those touchdowns, which at that RB2 spot is what you're looking for, especially this late. Again, I just don't see him getting enough touchdowns to hit that running back 21 mark. And if he fell like a round or 2, I don't hate him as a draft pick because, again, he's a talented runner. He showed he could produce with the volume, but he needs that volume. And a lot just really has to fall right for you to get that production out of him, which is not a bet I'm willing to make at this point in the draft, where I'm drafting a running back 2, a guy who's going to be starting week over week. And let's just be honest, investing in the Browns offense with starting running back capital tends to be a bad idea unless it's Nick Chubb. We've seen the Browns produce the occasional good fantasy guy, but this year I'm really not feeling it. This is a straight up rebuild. They are going for a quarterback next year, and I just don't see the draw to drafting Quinshon Judkins when he's a low ceiling, low floor guy. Now, the next guy we're going to be talking about is one of my favorite fantasy players of all time, not because he's been the best player all the time, but because he was a guy that I took as a rookie, took in his second year, and every year he's just kind of been old reliable up until last year. So Breece Hall is going off the board at running back 16, 31.4 overall, so 3rd, 4th rounder depending on where you're drafting. Similar to Judkins, he's on a bad offense, but I think Breece Hall has much more upside than Quinshon Judkins because of that receiving upside, and we've seen him do it. He finished running back 2 on the Jets, and on top of that, they just went and got Geno. They really bolstered their offense, and call me crazy, but I feel good about the possibility of Breece Hall performing week to week. Now, You're going to get some bad weeks. That is just a given with a team like the Jets. You're going to get weeks where he has 4 points or 6 points, but you're also going to get plenty of receiving floor that can help you most other weeks. Last year, half of his games were under double digits with 5 under 8 points. That's pretty bad. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but that's why you draft him as an RB2. I would not take Breece Hall as your RB1. That is not a bet I would be willing to make. It's not a good strategy. I would not go heavy wide receiver if you want to draft Breece Hall. You need the anchor running back. Even if it's a more top 10 based guy, not a top 3 or 4 guy, you need the solid running back on a good offense that can give you that weekly floor at your running back spots. The Jets offense doesn't get many scoring opportunities, so he is pretty reliant on his receiving upside. But again, that's why I like him more than Judkins. That's the difference. Judkins doesn't have that receiving upside that gives him a floor. Breece Hall does. The offense does, like I said, project to be better. I like Geno. I think Geno is going to love to dump it off. He did it to Ashton Genty last year, but again, I just would not take Breece Hall as your RB1. Get him as your RB2. I think he's perfectly fine there. And that's the thing with a lot of these risky players. It is all about roster construction. Don't draft Christian McCaffrey and Breece Hall. You are going to get hurt when Christian McCaffrey gets hurt and Breece Hall is putting up 6 points one week. It's just not a good idea. You need to take the safe plays early, and then once you get into more of those mid rounds, that's where you can take your shots. So Breece Hall, again, he's my fantasy sweetheart. Drafted him as a rookie. Drafted him coming off the injury when he finished as RB2. And this year, I do still like him. He's finished as an RB2 in the last couple years. He's finished 16 and 19. So you're getting him pretty close to his floor. It's just a matter of what is the ceiling with this player. So the last guy we're going to talk about who's stuck on a bad team is someone who came out of college blazing hot, lit the world on fire, looked amazing, Heisman finalist. And it's weird that it happened 2 years in a row. Now, I'm not going to talk about Jeremiah Love right now because he hasn't done anything yet. I'm going to talk about Ashton Genty instead because Ashton Genty to me is the epitome of a great player stuck on a bad team. The dude was electric at Boise State. I loved watching him. Again, I think he should have won the Heisman. The dude lit it up, and if Travis Hunter hadn't been a two-way player, Ashton Genty would have won it. Whatever. Don't get me started on that whole thing. I thought it was stupid that just because a guy played both ways, he got the Heisman, but I digress. Now, Ashton Genty last year finished running back 11, which isn't bad for a rookie, but he was drafted as a borderline top 5 running back, and the path to running back 11 was ugly. If you watched him play, even outside of fantasy, you could tell that the offense was just abysmal. It was depressing to see a player of Genty's caliber get shut down so hard through no fault of his own. It wasn't that he couldn't hit a hole or wasn't outrunning guys. The offensive line was letting guys through as soon as the ball was snapped. And I believe there was a stat through like 6 weeks where Ashton Genty's average point of contact was behind the line of scrimmage. He literally was getting hit before he even reached the line on average. That's how bad the offensive line was. So this year he's going at running back 7, 11.2 overall, so a fringe first round pick, which I do think is fair. He is a first round talent, and the Raiders went out and attempted to fix the problem the best they could. They got Fernando Mendoza. Don't know if he's going to play this year. They went and got Tyler Linderbaum, and Brock Bowers will be back. So the offense, again, does project to be a lot better, but there is still that risk of the poor offense. He had 7 weeks outside of running back 2 range last year from a guy who you probably took in the first round. He had 5 top 12 finishes, but when half your weeks are spent to the point where you shouldn't even be started, that's cause for concern. With Genty this year, it's just all about efficiency. We saw the volume last year. We know he can take it, but the efficiency metrics, mainly from the offensive line, need to be better. They need to give him room to run and break off those chunk plays. He got 73 targets last year, so if he can retain some of that receiving volume and get closer to that 1,200 rushing yard mark that he's very capable of, he is going to pay off on this investment. I'm on board, personally, with the possibility of drafting one of Genty or Breece. I think both are risky, but they each have their risk baked into their cost and just have the upside to pay off on that risk. I do lean Breece in this situation purely because he's a later pick, and so you aren't taking on as much early risk, which is a strategy I kind of go for. I don't like taking big risks in the first 2 rounds. It's just not a good way to win your league. But I do like both these guys, and I think Genty, if you can get him, if you're within 3 to 5 spots of the turn and you can get him in the second round, I feel like that's ideal. If you can get like an Amon-Ra St. Brown and an Ashton Genty and that's your first 2 picks, I think that is amazing. Amon-Ra gives you the weekly floor and high upside receiver, while Genty, if he has a bad week, you're not out, and then you can just get a floor running back like a Derrick Henry or something later in the draft, and you're cooking. And if Genty does pay off, if he does turn into the running back that we all know he can be, well, now you just got 2 amazing players in your first 2 rounds, while there are going to be some misses. So overall, I love Ashton Genty. I really, really hope that the Raiders offense can get it together this year because he's too electric of a player to just watch get swallowed up behind the line every play. And for fantasy, the case for him to pay off is not that crazy. Again, finished running back 11 last year. It is not that hard for him to go from running back 11 to running back 7 with the improvements they made on offense. So the next guy I'm going to be talking about is someone who doesn't have one big risk that worries me like a lot of other players, but it's just kind of a sum of all parts where he's had pretty much every risk in the book that you could think of, and it's caused him to have a very shaky career, and I just don't know that it's going to get better. So I'm talking about Kenneth Walker. Now, he goes off the board at running back 12, 20.8 overall, so late second, early third round pick. The main draw of this is that he signed with the Kansas City Chiefs. They gave him a big contract. They are going to make him their bell cow. That's great. I love the offense. I love the usage. But Kenneth Walker's previous highest finish was running back 18. This is due to injury, poor offensive play, and last year he finished running back 22 because he was splitting carries with Zach Charbonnet. Mainly at the goal line, but still, that's kind of the problem is after 4 years of hardly RB2 production, are we really going to say this is the year the guy goes elite? We've seen the sample. We've seen everything that can happen to him. And my biggest problem really, if you want to pick a single risk that worries me, is the injury. He has shown he can't hold up under a lot of strain. Last year, I think part of the reason he made it to the end of the year was because they split him with Charbonnet. I'm sure that was a very strategic move by the Seahawks because they knew his history. But the problem is, I think the Chiefs are going to make him the bell cow, and I don't know how long he can hold up. I think the weeks that you do have him, he's going to be great. The Chiefs' offense projects to be pretty good. Mahomes has said he wants to get Kenneth Walker the ball in the passing game, which is huge. And Walker just is a very talented running back. I'm not going to sit here and say he's a bad player. Just for fantasy, we've seen time and time again these question marks come up, and I just don't know why we keep overdrafting him. Again, he's going at the end of the second or the early third. There is a world where you could get Kenneth Walker as your second pick, and I just don't think that that is a world you want to live in. Because to me, you look at some of the other guys going in that range, even guys in the third round I like better than him. So to me, I would rather wait on Kenneth Walker, even if it's in the third round, and go get one of the elite tight ends or, I don't know, depends on what board you're playing, but there's just so much more elite talent there that I think is much safer and still has much higher upside, and then go get a Kyron Williams or even a Breece Hall later. I don't understand what the draw would be to drafting Kenneth Walker 15 to 20 picks, so 1 to 2 rounds earlier than Breece Hall. To me, they have a very similar range of outcomes. The difference is we've seen Breece Hall actually hit the RB2 numbers. Now, the offense isn't as good, and I do think that Kenneth Walker moving over to the Chiefs is a very good spot for him to be, and I think that it's going to help his fantasy. But overall, I just don't think it's worth paying that high of a price when you could wait 2 rounds and get a guy who has a pretty similar range of outcomes. I just don't see Kenneth Walker having the elite upside that you look for in the second round. I think there's a good chance he finishes as like a top 10 to 8 running back, but that's about it. I think the injury concerns me, and I think there's just a lot more to dislike and worry about with him than people are giving it credit for. So the last guy is probably the least shocking risky player ever. I mean, he needs to be talked about here because we're doing riskiest players, but you aren't going to be shocked to hear his name. I mean, the dude is as hot and cold as you can get. He's either top 2 running back or he is not really scoring you squat all year. And of course, I'm talking about Christian McCaffrey, the riskiest pick pretty much every year. He's high risk, high reward. He is a gambler's best friend. He currently goes at RB3, 5.6 overall. And I don't think I need to go too deep into this. The horse is far beyond dead. The horse is basically a skeleton at this point, and people still keep beating it. But I'm going to join in on the fun because Christian McCaffrey is just such a fun and electric player to watch that you hate to see him get hurt every other year. And last year, he had over 370 touches. That's kind of the magic number that we start to see that injury really progress and that risk really creep in. And on top of that, he's not getting any younger. Even last year, a lot of his efficiency metrics completely fell off. Now, they have been sacrificing a lot of people to the substation, so maybe that's a good sign that since there's been 10 injured 49ers already, that Christian McCaffrey will be the one that makes it through the year unscathed. But overall, I cannot bring myself to draft Christian McCaffrey knowing that in my mind, there is a very, very high chance, higher than any other player far and away, that he plays 1, maybe 2 games. I think that's the hard thing with Christian McCaffrey is drafting him won't win you your league. He'll give you a very good start. He will be a elite running back if he plays all year, but drafting him can lose you your league if he gets hurt. I just don't think that there's enough that you can do to pick up that risk later on unless you draft everybody else for floor and are just absolutely cracked at hitting your lottery ticket guys late. Because losing your first round draft pick is tough. Losing a first round draft pick like Christian McCaffrey, brutal, because you drafted him knowing full well what was possible. And that's why I recommend just staying away. I don't think that there's a chance that he really falls far enough to make it worth it. I think if by some miracle you can get him in the second round, that's where I would get him. I mean, I would snatch him up in a heartbeat, but you need another anchor before him to make it worthwhile. And there's just no way in a competitive league that he's making it to the second round. So I love Christian McCaffrey. I think he is one of the biggest fantasy football legends of all time. There just is no way that I can draft him in good conscience this year when every week I'm going to be just waiting for that substation to strike him down like lightning from God, because that's what we've seen. We've seen the trend happen over and over, not just with him, but with any running back who has that much volume. They don't hold up, and he's on the older side of the running back pool. He's just not a guy that I think you can draft in confidence this year, which is so depressing because when he's playing, he's elite, and I hope he proves me wrong, but I'm going to let someone else take that risk personally. It's just not worth it to me. So that wraps up our 5 riskiest running backs. Just to recap, we went over Quinshon Judkins, Breece Hall, and Ashton Genty as 3 guys scattered throughout the draft who are all on bad offenses but hopefully can outperform that. We went over Kenneth Walker, who has kind of every risk that you could be worried about, but in a very minor way, and the ultimate injury risk, the ultimate risk period, Christian McCaffrey. They might as well call him the lottery ticket because that's basically what you're getting every year. Now, granted, he hits a lot more often than a lottery ticket, but you get what I'm saying. He's a luck of the draw, spin the roulette wheel and pray that your color hits. So with that, we will see you next time. I'm going to be doing the same thing, like I said, for wide receivers and then quarterbacks and tight ends, going over the riskiest players at each position so that you know who to look at and who to be aware of going into this year. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.